Over 22 million people have now seen the exact moment Jasmine Crockett faced off against Nancy Mace during a brutal congressional hearing on white privilege. It wasn't just political theater. It turned personal when Mace looked Jasmine dead in the eye and said, "You people are always causing trouble." The room froze. Crockett didn't yell. She dismantled her one calm, devastating sentence at a time. Because when a congresswoman says "you people" on national television, you have to ask yourself who gets to be we in America and who doesn't. And more importantly, what happens when someone finally dares to answer? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing opens. The air is tight. The war isn't declared, but it's already begun. The Capitol's hearing chamber had seen generations of conflict. Some whispered, others screamed. Today it was both. From the outside, it looked like another dry meeting of the House Oversight Committee, but inside, the tension crackled like an exposed wire. The agenda on paper was simple. A debate on the federal budget for racial equity programs in public education. But everyone in the room knew better. This wasn't about budget lines or policy briefs. It was about which version of America would be allowed to survive in the classroom. At one end of the dais, Representative Nancy Mace sat with the poise of someone used to being on camera. Her folder was crisp, color-coded, and carefully placed beside a chilled bottle of water. She wore a white blazer, spotless. The visual contrast wasn't accidental. She had built her brand on walking the line, sharp enough to jab, polished enough to deflect the backlash. The moment the gavel struck, she leaned into the mic with surgical precision and spoke like a scalpel carving into soft tissue. "Let me be clear," she began, her voice clipped, confident and calculated. "What's being sold to our children as progress is actually poison. Critical race theory doesn't teach facts. It teaches resentment. It doesn't promote unity. It plants division. It tells white children they're born to oppress, and black children they're doomed to be oppressed. That is not education. That is not America." A few murmurs of agreement echoed from her side of the aisle. The camera light turned red. She wasn't just talking to the committee. She was talking to voters, to talk show producers, to history itself, and trying to rewrite it. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She sat 2 chairs down, legs crossed, pen idle, lips pressed into a flat line. Where Mace looked curated, Crockett looked carved from conviction. A daughter of the South, a civil rights attorney turned congresswoman. Her hair was braided back tight, her expression tighter. Every inch of her posture said, "I've been through more than this room can throw at me." But her stillness wasn't passivity. It was pressure coiled and waiting. Mace reached for a printed handout, highlighted in red, and held it up like a courtroom exhibit. "This," she snapped, "was found in a middle school curriculum, funded with federal equity dollars. It teaches that capitalism was built on slavery, that police disproportionately target minorities, and that America's founding documents are rooted in white supremacy." She paused. "This is a taxpayer-funded guilt trip designed to shame white children for things they didn't do." Another pause, this one longer, deliberate. "Let me ask the committee, when did education stop being about math and science and become a platform to punish kids based on the color of their skin?" She let the words hang, knowing they would land exactly where she intended. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink, but inside something flared. Not rage, not yet. Something deeper, something older. It wasn't just the lie that stung. It was the ease with which it was spoken, the comfort, the confidence, the certainty in Mace's voice that her words would be met with nods, not consequences, because that was privilege. That was the stage on which this entire hearing was being performed. Jasmine leaned back slightly, arms still crossed, eyes fixed on the woman across from her. She'd seen this play out too many times before in courtrooms, in faculty meetings, in Sunday school curriculum. And always the script was the same: erase the pain, protect the pride. Mace continued, her voice rising like a closing argument sharpened by polls, not principle. If we really care about kids, black, white, or otherwise, then we need to stop teaching them that America is broken. We need to teach them to rise, not to resent. We need to stop spending federal dollars on lessons that divide us by race and start investing in what unites us. Another wave of polite applause from her side. Her smile was subtle, confident. She believed she just won the room, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't clapping. She wasn't even blinking, because when someone builds a platform on revisionist history, all it takes is one voice armed with truth to burn the whole thing down. But just when the room thought Mace had finished, just as pens dropped and shoulders began to settle, she leaned forward slightly, smiling, and delivered the line that would detonate everything. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her words landed like a coated missile wrapped in calm. You people always act like America owes you something. Maybe if you stopped blaming white privilege and started working harder, we wouldn't be in this mess. There it was, not just a dog whistle, a full siren, not just a fencing. The chamber stilled, the shuffling stopped. The oxygen left the room, and something colder took its place. Jasmine didn't flinch, but her pen stopped. Her spine straightened. Her eyes rose from the yellow pad like a storm-breaking surface. "Excuse me," she said, voice low and dangerously steady. "Did you just say, you people?" No gasps, just a ricochet of glances, aide to aide, staffer to staffer. Everyone knew they had crossed into dangerous ground. Mace didn't retreat, didn't rephrase. She smiled, shrugged, then she doubled down. "That's right. You people are always causing trouble." Ha! A pen dropped. A chair creaked. A congressional aide sucked air through his teeth. The chairwoman didn't speak, but her glance toward the Democratic bench said it all. Brace yourselves. But Jasmine didn't react. She absorbed. This wasn't silence. It was prelude, the kind of pause before the crack of thunder. Jasmine's eyes didn't blink. She stared straight at Mace, her hands still neatly folded, but there was something seismic happening behind her palm. Not anger, memory, the kind of memory that doesn't fade with time, only burrows deeper. The memory of being followed in stores, of hearing locks click as she walked past cars, of being told to smile more in meetings, of being told she was so articulate like it was a surprise, of being told, you people for years, just never on camera, never in Congress. And then she spoke. No trembling, no fire, just steel. If my people are always causing trouble, Congresswoman, then why are we always the ones getting handcuffed, denied, undervalued, and underpaid? She didn't yell it, she measured it, like a blade being drawn an inch at a time. Each word sharper than the last. The room didn't erupt, it froze. May sat back, unsure whether to interrupt or ignore. But there was no ignoring what had just been said, not when it carried generations of withheld fury behind its restraint. No one moved, no one whispered, no one dared even check their phones. The moment was balancing on a razor's edge, and everyone in the room knew it, because Jasmine Crockett hadn't just answered a slur. She had turned it into a mirror and made the whole room look. The silence was still hanging like a blade in the air, when Jasmine moved, not abruptly, not theatrically, but with the deliberate grace of someone who had been here before. Her hand slid from the pad to the desk. Pen made a faint clicking sound as it touched the wood. She didn't look down. She didn't even breathe differently. She just let the weight of that moment settle and then cracked it open. Her voice was steady, low, precise. It didn't tremble, and it didn't need volume to land like thunder. "I think it's time we stop pretending." She let that sentence hang, just long enough to make everyone stop blinking. "It's time to talk honestly about something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Something many of you say isn't real because you've never had to live with it." Her eyes didn't leave Mace's. But her words weren't for her anymore. They were for every room like this one. It's called privilege. The word dropped like a gavel. And the truth is some people never have to see what others live through. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it doesn't happen to them. No one moved. The air in the chamber shifted, lighter in some corners, heavier in others. Jasmine's voice never rose, but it coiled with power, like a storm whispering before it strikes. Privilege is when you can say something like "you people" and not even realize what it means. It's thinking you're just telling the truth when really you're showing that you've never had to question your place in this country. She paused only for a heartbeat. So let's be honest. Let's talk about what happens when history's changed, when people feel guilty just for seeing the truth, and when being comfortable matters more than being fair. The silence didn't break because everyone in the room knew. They weren't just listening to a response. They were watching someone speak a truth they couldn't ignore. Her voice didn't rise, but the truth in it did. There was no fire in her tone, no fury in her delivery, only something far more unsettling, calm certainty. And when the weight of her words finally landed, she didn't reach for outrage. She didn't raise her hands or her voice. Instead, she reached for something colder, something heavier, proof, because feelings can be ignored, twisted, or dismissed. But facts expose the cracks that polite conversation hides. Facts don't care who's offended. Facts turn silence into guilt, and facts, they make cowards out of denial. Jasmine leaned forward, not to grandstand, but to strike with surgical clarity. Her movements were quiet, almost too quiet for how loud the room felt. She opened a slim folder resting in front of her and slid out a few pages with the precision of someone handling evidence at a crime scene. The paper didn't crinkle. Her hands didn't shake. Her tone didn't shift. But something in the atmosphere did, like the sound before a lightning strike. This wasn't a speech anymore. It was cross-examination, and the jury was the nation. "Let me start with school," she said. I steady. A 14-year-old white student in Missouri brought a loaded handgun to school. Not a rumor, not a toy, a real gun. He was suspended for 5 days. No charges filed. The principal said it was, quote, handled internally. No police, no record, no mug shot. She looked up, not to provoke, just to make sure they were listening. Then she turned the page, eyes never leaving the microphone. Now, a 12-year-old black student in Florida brought a plastic water gun to school, a toy. He was tackled by school security. The police were called. He was handcuffed in front of his classmates, shoved into the back of a cruiser. His mother was told he was now flagged in the juvenile justice system. The words dropped like stones one after another. Heavy, cold, brutally clear, same country, different consequences. And for what? For the color of a child's skin. That's not discipline, that's a message. She paused, just enough for the truth to echo. Let's move to the job market. Another page turned. 2 resumes, same degree, same GPA, same internships, same work experience. But one name says Josh Miller. The other says Deshaun Williams. She let the names hang in the air like a challenge. Josh got a 46% callback rate. Deshaun 14%. Not because he was less qualified, but because someone saw the name and made a decision before the interview ever happened. A longer silence this time. Even the ambient noise, the shifting in chairs, the tapping of pens had stopped. Jasmine didn't slow down. She couldn't afford to. "And let's talk about housing," she said, sliding a final page to the top. A black family in Cincinnati had their home appraised at $110,000. They removed all the family photos, the African artwork, the books on black history. They asked a white friend to pretend to be the owner. The same house, the same neighborhood, the same furniture, the second appraisal, $110,000. 160, 0, 0. She raised her eyes. That's $1.50, 0, difference for skin tone. It was no longer just quiet, it was tense, the kind of stillness that no one tries to break because deep down they know they're not ready for what comes next. Jasmine leaned in again, but this time her voice softened, not weak, just quieter, sharper. Privilege is when you can afford to believe this isn't real because it's never happened to you. She didn't need to yell it. That sentence was a mirror. It reflected everything. It's the ability to hear stories like these and still ask, are you sure it's about race? That question isn't curiosity. It's avoidance. It's comfort trying to rewrite reality. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She looked at the people in front of her, elected officials, lawyers, teachers, staffers, people who had the power to pretend this wasn't systemic. You see, for some of you, racism is a topic, a theory, a discussion point. For us, it's daily life. And when we speak about it, we're told we're imagining things. Now the silence wasn't awkward. It was thick, heavy, indicting. If you need more proof, I have it. But the truth is, you already know. And with that, she let the silence stand, not because she had nothing left to say, but because she had said what needed to be heard. But as Jasmine's final sentence cut through the room, sharp as bone, deep as history, not everyone was ready to sit with it, especially not the one who had just been disarmed. Some truths don't just sting, they provoke. And that's when Nancy Mace made her move. She shifted forward in her chair, like a fuse catching fire. Her voice jumped out, jagged and rushed, slicing across the tension like a dull blade. That's not fair. It was meant to stop the momentum, to regain control, to fracture the silence before it could settle too long in anyone's conscience. But her words barely made it past the second syllable before the chairwoman's gavel tapped once. Sharp final, Congresswoman Mace, you'll have your opportunity to respond. But right now, she said, eyes narrowed, it's Representative Crockett's time. A hush swept over the room, not relief, not submission. Something closer to respect or maybe fear, not of Crockett, but of what might come next. Because no one had expected this black woman in a dark suit and calm eyes to take the hearing hostage without raising her voice once. But here she was, not just speaking, but commanding. Nancy Mace clenched her jaw and leaned back, visibly irritated, but said nothing. She folded her arms with the stiffness of someone who had just lost the air in their sails. The energy that had once flowed in her direction had turned, and now all eyes were shifting. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply adjusted her mic a half-inch closer, took a breath that seemed to gather not just oxygen, but every insult, every dismissal, every time she had been talked over, belittled, or waved off in rooms like this. And then she leaned in because the floor was finally hers, and she knew exactly what to do with it. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout or point. All she needed was the truth, and she held it in her hands like evidence. At a trial where the nation was the jury, slowly she pulled out a clean, stapled document. The pages didn't shake in her fingers because she wasn't nervous. She was focused, steady, a stillness that came not from calm, but from clarity, from years of carrying these numbers inside her, not just on paper, but in her bones. She laid the report gently on the table, turned it toward the committee, and spoke into the mic with the kind of precision that slices deeper than anger ever could. This is a report published by the U.S. Department of Justice last year. It's not a blog post. It's not an activist flyer. It's your government on record telling the story some of you refuse to hear. Her tone didn't accuse. It revealed each word like a brick being removed from the wall of denial. It found that black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. That's not a feeling. That's not a theory. That's a statistic, and it's not new. She looked up, scanning the room. Not for permission, but for accountability. Even when unarmed, even when not resisting, even when trying to run away over and over again, the pattern is the same. One set of lives gets hesitation, the other gets bullets. She let that sit, not for drama, but because some truths need silence to sink in. Let's talk sentencing. Same crime, same substances, same criminal histories. But if you are a person of color, specifically black or Latino, you will on average receive a sentence that is 30% longer than your white counterpart. She tapped the document lightly, not to emphasize, but to remind them this isn't her opinion. It's the government's own admission. You can take race off the application, off the courtroom transcript, off the parole board paperwork, but somehow it still finds its way into the outcome. Now the room was still, not respectfully, uncomfortably, like everyone knew. They were hearing something they could no longer unhear. And here's what I need you to understand, she continued, her voice dropping just slightly. Calmer but heavier. White privilege doesn't mean white people never suffer. It doesn't mean your life has been easy. It doesn't mean you haven't earned what you have. She paused, and then came the sentence that seemed to shift the air in the room. White privilege isn't the privilege to never be wrong. It's the privilege to be forgiven when you are. Her words were clean software, but unrelenting like water that wears down stone. It's the privilege of being seen as a person first. Not a problem, it's getting a second chance, a benefit of the doubt, a soft voice instead of a raised weapon. A few staffers exchanged quiet looks. One aide near the back bit the inside of his cheek. Another scribbled something, then stopped halfway through. Jasmine kept going, slow, steady, lethal. Privilege is when a teenage white boy caught with pills is sent to rehab, but a black teenager with the same pills is sent to prison. It's when one parent gets told, "Let's help your son get back on track," and another gets told, "Your kid is a threat to public safety." Her hand rested on the document again. This time, it wasn't to emphasize data. It was to anchor herself in something unshakable. The numbers don't lie, but too often we pretend they don't matter because they don't hurt you, because they didn't happen to you. She looked around. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired, focused, worn by experience, but sharpened by purpose. White privilege is not the ability to do wrong. It's the ability to recover from it. It's the ability to survive it. It's the ability to be seen as human after you failed. And then she paused. Not for applause, not for permission, just long enough, hun, to let the truth take root. The truth is, we all make mistakes, but only some of us get to come back from them. The silence that followed was heavier than before, not because of tension, but because of recognition. Because the facts were no longer just numbers on a page. They were mirror-in, and everyone in the room was staring into their own reflection. She hadn't stormed out. She hadn't pointed fingers. She hadn't cried. But somehow, Jasmine Crockett had left the entire hearing chamber feeling like a fire had rolled through it quietly but completely. And what no one inside those marble walls fully understood at the time was this. They weren't the only ones who had heard her. Outside the Capitol, the world had been waiting. People were scrolling, clicking, tapping, hungry for something real. And when that clip hit the internet, just under 2 minutes, no edits, no spin, it detonated. Jasmine's voice, calm but sharp, was now everywhere. Her words, white privilege is not the privilege to be right. It's the privilege to be forgiven when you're wrong. They didn't just trend. They echoed, they haunted. By the time the hearing adjourned, the video had already crossed 1 million views. The next morning, #1 on YouTube, not an ad, Not a music video, a congressional hearing, raw, unfiltered, real. In a small-town office 70 in Missouri, a long-haul truck driver named Kevin had just pulled into a diner, 14 hours on the road.